Hello, everybody. I want to tell you a little bit about our awesome guest, Jon Ostenson, today. And you really want to have a little bit of time for this show because Jon is a real guru in a way to have a business without having to develop everything from scratch. You have probably heard about franchises, and Jon is a real expert helping people to get into the franchise business, which is a huge benefit in fundamental terms because the business is already fundamentally created for you. But what's really cool is that Jon and his team have developed more and more really current and interesting ways on how you can get into franchising in areas that you would totally not anticipate. So come to the show, listen to Jon and me talk about how might franchising be one of the ways for you to invest and have a business without having to develop everything from scratch. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. Today we have a special guest with a slightly different topic. With us today is Jon Ostenson. Jon, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Love the show and looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into franchising, so anybody listening, I'm going to talk about franchising today because that's where Jon's special sauce is, so to speak. And FranBridge Consulting is his company and his team is working with people for franchising. But maybe tell us a little bit, how did you get into that and how did you actually end up in the role and in the position that you're in right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks again for having me. My background, like many of your listeners, is, it started off in the corporate world and, did the grad school route and worked for corporate America, had a good run, but, had an itch to do something a little more entrepreneurial, didn't know what that looked like, didn't know how I could make it happen, what the pathway was. But in my mid 30s, I kind of stumbled upon it, got lucky. I left the public company world and stepped into the leadership role of a private company. And that was Shelf Genie franchise system, which is custom pellet shelving for your kitchens and pantries. We had couple hundred locations across North America, and I had the opportunity to step in and lead our operations day to day, supporting all these new business owners all across the country. And for me, that was a really pivotal moment to see all these pathways to business ownership that oftentimes I didn't associate with franchising. I'd always thought about franchising and fast food as being synonymous.
Yeah,
And
like McDonald's or something.
yeah, and that's what comes to mind for most people. And so, anyway, ended up partnering with the founder. We spun off. We've invested in franchises ourselves. Now on the other side of the table, so went from franchisor to franchisee, and I've got some other partners too. And we invest, and we're franchisees of multiple brands. But we've got good people running those for us. It allows me to spend about 90% of my time helping others do the same. And so we work with over 500 brands across North America, a lot of different industries. And a lot of what I do is getting out there and educating, helping people understand how franchising works and the types of opportunities that are available. And I take them through a path, a very streamlined process where we match them up to opportunities that could be a good fit for them to consider based on what we're seeing resonate with others with similar backgrounds all across the country.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for explaining that. I mean, one of the things that for our audience, we come, as you know, as we call it the Ideal Investor Show because we're helping people in what we claim or like to say from our perspective with our strategy ideal is the investing in real estate. And I know that at least to some extent, there is some component of real estate oftentimes involved in franchises. But maybe before we go there, can you maybe start out to say, okay, from a financial perspective, what would somebody who is fundamentally interested have to look at basically financially, both input and what they could potentially expect the output to be?
Absolutely. No. 75% of the deals that we do on behalf of clients fall between, I'd say, 125,000 and 300,000. That's kind of the sweet spot. And yeah, that encompasses a lot of different industries. Obviously, if you're going into food, that's going to be more capital intensive. And what we find is 95% of our clients don't want food. And that's not my background. So we focus on all these other industries. But, from a funding standpoint, I'd say 1/3 of our clients use cash. We have record levels of cash on the sidelines. So they're self-funding it. Another third use SBA loans. That's very common. Another third use retirement plans, and they'll self-direct those IRAs, 401ks, using what's called a ROBS program, which we help through. Some use portfolio loans or HELOCs as well. So lots of different ways to fund the business. From an output standpoint, I'd refer to the item 19. Every franchise system has what's called an FDD, or franchise disclosure document. Within that, there's an area called the item 19 where the franchisor makes their representations of, hey, here are all of our averages across our other locations, kind of what you can expect, if you were to step in and make a purchase. And I mean, it's across the board, but what I find is it's pretty eye-opening to people when they understand what can be made. Good example, I kind of joke that non-sexy is the new sexy when it comes to industries. People are enjoying, like,
Yeah.
I've got clients buying roll-off dumpsters and insulation. We're owners of a driveway company, things like that. They're just, in some cases, essential services, but if nothing else, they're Amazon resistant. But, we've done a couple of gutters deals recently, and all of our new owners had no background in this. One had background in insurance in South Carolina, another one up in New Jersey had a corporate sales and marketing background. Then we had one, and I love this example because it's just so different than his background, a former Wall Street attorney, a recovering Wall Street attorney, as he would say, 47 years old, outside of Boston, fell in love with this gutter business. And the numbers on that business, and this is partly why I fell in love with it. All in investment, you're between 150 and 250, depending on a few different variables. But they're averaging across all their locations 1.7 million in revenue with a 30% EBITDA bottom line margin. So end of the day, if you're running the business, you're making 30%. If you put a general manager in place, obviously that's going to eat into that a little bit.
Right.
But that's a pretty good ROI. And of course, you're cash flowing. You're able to write off expenses as a business owner, but then you're also building an asset that's going to have an exit value down the road.
Yeah, and I would imagine, coming from my lens of real estate, that there's probably ultimately going to be some storage or operations facility or something like that where you would have like the materials and the tools and maybe kind of like a base of operation in that sense that also builds value over time.
Yeah, no, and I'd say about a third of the deals that we do for clients are a customer-facing retail environment type business, but about 2/3 are these service type businesses that don't require a physical location that's customer-facing. Maybe over time you either have a storage unit or you grow into a small industrial space. But
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I've actually heard, I don't know if you have any connection to that some people actually do franchising for storage units, right? Like literally where there's an operator and they're looking for somebody to basically the franchisee for opening up new locations. And that brings me to one question that I've always been kind of fascinated by in the context of franchising. I think it comes from the movie and the whole McDonald's and food industry thing. But it always sounded to me that there are basically, in a way, two categories. And you just kind of mentioned a minute ago the general manager. But can you elaborate a little bit the difference between buying a franchise to quote unquote operate it, basically be the person or the family or the group of people running the business, maybe with very little experience, versus being kind of like the owner operator without necessarily really doing the daily work? As far as I understand it, and I hope I'm not totally wrong, there is a difference, right?
there is. No, you hit it on the head. And I'd say roughly half of our clients are looking to make the jump into an owner-operator role. Maybe they're coming from the corporate world and they're looking to run something full-time. But the other half are looking at what we call an executive model, or semi-passive, semi-absentee. And that is, like you said, putting a general manager in place day one. They go through the franchisor training. Franchising really lends itself to that because while you would be providing some support and coaching on the sideline, you also have a franchisor and their support team also overlooking their shoulder and providing support. So it gives you a level of comfort. I've got quite a few clients that say, well, where do I find a general manager? How do I align our interests? How do I set them up for success? And, we talk a lot about that. I actually brought in a client of mine, we've done a number of deals together. He's the largest franchisee of 2 Men and a Truck moving service and operates in 10 markets, $30 million business. And every deal that he and I have done along the way, he's put a young guy in place and said, hey, go make us proud. He actually gives them a little bit of equity, some sweat equity.
Okay, cool.
In every case, he's come back and bought additional locations within the first 12 months. And that's how we run our businesses too. We put a general manager in place and set them up for success. So anyway, he's now coaching our clients out of the gate on how do you structure that arrangement, what are best practices and such.
Yeah, that's really cool. One thing for the investment strategies that we typically run through in the ideal investor journey, try at least to the extent possible to take advantage of leverage. And it's not really a competition in that sense, especially this year. But fundamentally, there's many, many people who get indoctrinated by the media to believe the only place where you can really make some significant money is the stock market. And when I say, well, yeah, but have you ever realized if you put, let's say, $30,000 into the stock market, even if the market is doing much better than it does this year, and I put $30,000 in a real estate deal, but I get $150,000 of value because it's an 80-20 deal. But I, as the owner or any of our clients, is allowed to keep 100% of the profit made on the whole amount, right? So even if that property only, let's say, has a 7% improvement, right? So that's basically around $10,000, but on $30,000 down, there aren't that many years in the stock market where you can beat that kind of return. You just said 30%, which is kind of in that same ballpark. So I'm wondering, the 401k or IRA money is one thing, but when people do like a HELOC or so forth, are you helping them to kind of sooner rather than later get their private assets out of the deal? Because I'm always a little afraid that, if you take your personal residence as a collateral for a business deal, and I'm actually not advising our clients to do that, but if you absolutely have to, you should see that that is only temporary. What's your thinking about that?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. And first off, on the 30%, so that would be 30% on revenue. So if your revenue is 1.7, that extrapolates to, we'll go conservative, call it 500,000, drop in the bottom line. Well, that's on an initial investment of around 200,000.
Right.
So you're actually, your return is much higher when you think about it in terms of returns. The 30% was simply as a percentage of revenue. So that's what gets people thinking. It's like, whoa, you actually can make some really good money here. Yeah, nothing's a sure thing, but when you can look at averages across a franchise system, it certainly gives you a level of confidence. Now, with the HELOCs, I think it's, where we've had homes appreciate a good bit and people say, hey, for starting capital, I'd like to use that rather than taking on more debt, say as an SBA loan or tapping into my retirement. So it's really depending on looking at their whole portfolio where it makes sense to kind of tap into. I mean, I'm a big fan of portfolio loans, using leverage like you talked about, where, if you have $1 million in a brokerage account that's non-retirement, you can borrow against that. Typically, my advisor only lets me do 50%, but you can't even go higher and invest that on whatever you want. I'm paying 1.5% interest on that. I flip it into real estate lending deals where I'm doing 12 or 14%. It's arbitrage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or the
Yeah.
other option would be if people were smart enough to do whole life insurance at some point, whether they were in a job or whatever their background was, you basically have 100% collateral in the policy and you can use the money. Rates have gone up a little bit, but it's still, compared to like a business loan, it's still significantly cheaper to get going that way. So you said in your little list of things for Axel to know for our interview that you feel real estate investors are a great fit for franchising. Can you explore and elaborate a little bit why you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. Over 75% of our clients, have investments in real estate as well. I mean, I personally do as well, single family homes. I've got a handful of those. In some cases, clients say, hey, we like the idea of diversifying our portfolio, but they've already got that idea of the passive or semi-passive revenue streams and how those can play well together. Right. And others, they say, hey, if I've got duplexes or maybe I've got commercial properties and we're already paying a service provider to service those in some way, why don't I become the service provider and serve, my own asset base as well as those, others. And so examples of that would be, I mentioned some of those home services or property services type businesses,
Right.
which could be, but then also, like we had a real estate broker recently come to us and say, hey, I've got a team in place. I want to extend into property management, but I'd rather not start from first base. I'd rather start from third base essentially, and be able to get up and running faster. So I introduced him to a property management franchise and he's been off to the races. So, there can be direct complements like that too. Of course, on the actual physical real estate side, we've had some real estate investors who recently purchase an oil change business that they bought 10 locations of, where it uses prefabricated buildings in unused parking spaces of a retail shopping center. Super convenient for the customer, great street visibility. You can get in and out. It kind of checks all the boxes. All in investment, $150 per location, but you're doing $330 in revenue with about $130 on the bottom line. So again, $130 over $150, pretty much doubling your investment, and you'll be able to sell it down the road.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. Thanks for explaining that. Now, I can imagine that some of our audience is listening to this and say, hey, this all really kind of sounds pretty cool from a concept. I can see the numbers. I can see the connection to real estate. But if I don't already know, if I'm not already a real estate broker, or if I'm not already into cars or stuff like that, how does Jon help me to figure out what would be a good franchise? Or, I don't know, you said in your list, right franchise. I don't know if it's not a thing like a right one, but a good one, or somehow to figure out what kind of resonates. Because I always say, and I say this for myself, and I always say this to our clients, to really know and stick with a plan, with a program, going on a journey, requires a certain level of passion, motivation, energy that tells you, yeah, I'm not just doing this because this sounds good right now, but I anticipate there are good times and not so good times. There might be some obstacles, and I can see myself sticking to the plan. So with that in mind, if somebody were to say, Jon, I really like this, I like the numbers, I think I can swing the amount of money somehow, maybe with your help, but how do I figure out what a good kind of franchise would be?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like, dating around, to find the right partner. You don't want to go the first one you met, most likely. So what we've done, there's roughly 4,000 brands in the US across industries. You take out the food and lodging ones, hotels, we don't
Yeah.
work with those either. Yes, there's roughly 2,000 left. Well, we vetted those down to a little over 500 ones that check the boxes on the leadership teams, the niches, the competitive advantage, the financial models, kind of check all the boxes. And so what I would do is get to know a client, and we'd spend a little bit of time together on a call or two. I would then present them with opportunities that are available in their market that match their criteria, typically 8, 9, 10 opportunities. Ones that we see resonating with others, who's getting the attention, who's got something unique about them out there in other markets. And so we introduce them to, on average, 8, 9, 10 opportunities. They then narrow it down to 3, maybe 4 at most, actually have a call with, that we tee up. Entirely no obligation. They can drop out at any time, but their thinking evolves through the process. Since they go through a very streamlined approach with a franchisor where they get exposed to the unit economics, the financials, and the territory mapping and the franchise disclosure review, the getting to do validation, talking to other owners in the system, ultimately getting to spend a full day or two on site with the franchisor and their team, making sure it's the right fit, both ways. And all through that process, we're holding our clients' hands, serving as a sounding board, serving as a reference, providing perspective. And so we found that process to be very effective. I mean, the great thing is there's no cost to working with us. It's entirely free. We're funded by the franchisors on the back end. For them, it's a sales and marketing expense, and none of that gets passed on to our clients in any way. So it's a really clean model from that standpoint, and really allows us to advocate for our clients and sit on their side of the table and be very consultative in how we work with them.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to something I had been meaning to ask you. Maybe I just didn't dig quite deep enough. I saw that you, in your sequence and in your program, offer people who want to kind of explore this. I saw you call pre-launch coaching, but I wasn't so sure. I kind of think everybody can understand what that probably kind of means. But when you then launch, meaning I'm assuming that means like the new owners are basically officially start, like, I don't know, June 1st, the bell rings and we get going. Are you guys going to continue to be involved after the launch or throughout that whole until the new franchise owner is basically settled, or how would that look like?
Yeah, so we're taking them up really to the point of launch. We do provide the pre-launch coaching. We've got a coaching resource that is very well experienced and kind of coaches them up in a number of things franchising. But really, it's the franchisor's responsibility and obligation, or not obligation. That's not the right word, but their opportunity to step in and really take the baton from us at that point in time, and really come in close with the new owner. And they take them through extensive training. They have ongoing sessions and coaching sessions. So we let them do their thing at that point. But I love to stay in contact with my clients over time. And we touch base. They share their successes with me. And all the time that we've done this and all the clients we put into business, we've only had one that it hasn't worked out for that's no longer in business. And there are some reasons around that. He lived 3 hours outside the market and it just wasn't, he realized there was going to be too much effort. But no, so we love kind of tracking with them. And then when they come back to purchase a second brand in their portfolio, which is very common, or to expand into additional locations, we re-engage and help with that.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. Now, I mean, I every so often get asked to be a guest on a podcast, and because it's obviously about real estate, I'm always being asked, okay, tell me one of your really not so good deals, and then tell me one that was really a home run, and let our audience know why. Can you do that? And you can pick which one you want to go first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, without a doubt. So, yeah, I'd say the one that didn't work out. Great guy. There's nothing wrong with him, nothing wrong with the franchise system, but it was a mosquito franchise, and he lived 3 hours outside of Nashville, but he felt like Nashville was the right market for the business. But he didn't have any good contacts there, no friends and family. And several months in, he's running all this marketing. He's getting some customers. He's got someone running the business for him. But for him, not having the friends and family on the ground, doing some of those grassroots efforts, he just realized it's going to be a lot of effort to get the business to where it needed to be. And he had a full-time job, and he said, I think I'm going to need to throw in the towel. So everyone left on good terms. It wasn't a horror story, but it didn't.
Right.
He's no longer in business. Gosh, I mean, which one do I want to pick for a favorite? I mean, I've got a client right now that is just going gangbusters. He just launched back in the fall as a roll-off dumpster business, and he saw the opportunity. This is a guy, he owns businesses already, mid-40s, not super old, but he owns multiple businesses, non-franchised. And he said, hey, maybe for my next opportunity, I should consider a franchise. And he's just blown out his plans. He, because it's a capital intensive business, he just did a small capital raise and brought an investor in to allow him to go from Columbia to Greenville, South Carolina to Charleston. And I checked in with him last week, and he said he wants to purchase the whole state, the rights to the whole state. But he's running semi-absentee, put a great operator in place, and he's having fun doing it.
And just so for me to understand, so those are these kind of things that look like a shipping container cut in half that they basically bring and then put all your building crap in there, basically, or the stuff you got to get rid of and pay a fee and be done with it, that kind of thing?
Yeah, you described it better than I would.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I have actually in our street, I've seen it twice in the last few years where somebody made a major renovation, the other one wanted to have a better driveway, and what do you do with all that concrete? So
yeah,
no, that makes
absolutely.
kind of sense. I can see that there's a need, especially since more and more people, I feel, with COVID have gotten into doing stuff themselves. Even things where you used to get a contractor. Partially might be because there aren't that many contractors out there anymore. All right. Cool.
Well, I've got a good one in San Diego, actually. A couple of clients of mine that are getting into some neat businesses there. So I'll have to introduce you.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to do that. I always love to get to know new people. Now, coming a little bit towards the end of the show, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you the same two questions that we asked everybody. So the first one is, if you could meet anybody, like in the past or current, who would it be and why?
I think Teddy Roosevelt, and just, I've read all about him, heard his quotes. I think he led the country during a very interesting time and made a lot of tough decisions. He wasn't perfect, but yeah, that's who I would point to that I would say, hey, I'd love to have dinner with Teddy.
You're going to ask him about the Green New Deal?
I'd have a whole list of things to ask him about.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's definitely, I'm sure, an interesting observation, especially for people, when you think back at what times he was in charge, that was definitely not an easy task to do. Okay, and then the other question that we ask everybody is, if you had a time machine, Jon, where would you go and why?
I think I'd have to go back to biblical times, which is obviously a long time period, but maybe, while Jesus walked on earth at 30 or so years, I wouldn't want to stay there very long. Conditions were harsh back then, but I would love to kind of fly in and get to interact with some of the individuals that were around at that time. It's so much of history is based on that, no matter what your belief system is. A lot of things are based around that. And I think it would just be fascinating to kind of live in the moment for things that we've read about.
Maybe you could have talked him into a Mana franchise.
Well played. Well played.
Yeah, I know you're not in the food industry, but I had to try anyway.
Okay. I can make exceptions.
Yeah, exactly, for the special stuff, right? Okay, cool. Well, Jon, it was great fun to have you on the show. I'm sure some people were intrigued to hear, well, it's not really that impossible. And based on what you told our audience, regular people who just want to do something different with their life and be passionate about building a business, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to get in touch and maybe see what's available for them?
Yeah, no, I'd say as a first step, come out to our website, framebridgeconsulting.com, sign up for our monthly newsletter. We share some great content every month, and we'll make sure that all of your listeners receive a copy of our book that comes out in the third quarter called Non-Food Franchising. So we'll get them a copy of that. And then if you'd like to have a conversation, reach out. We've got our email address and everything on the website, and happy to jump on even a 10 or 15-minute call and hear a little bit more about your situation and share some thoughts on what next steps might look like. Follow us on social media. LinkedIn's where we're most active, putting out content, but would love to engage whenever the time's right.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I can attest, when I went in yesterday to prepare for the show, I saw it pops up like about 20 seconds after you get to the website. All right, cool. Well, thank you, John, for being on the show. Any last words you want to share?
I would just say, if you're an American right now, I mean, the entrepreneurship's alive and well. We have conversations all day, every day with those that are considering business ownership. And it's encouraging to see the spirit that's out there right now. And we're having a lot of fun helping them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my last word in this context is along the same lines. I would say there is a absolutely big misnomer to call people who are no longer W-2 employees the Great Resignation, because I think it's actually the Great Awakening, if you ask me, of people saying there must be a different way than dancing to somebody else's tune. And I think there's way more people than the media is going to let us believe that have that Great Awakening, even though the trigger may have been not necessarily the nicest circumstance. But now that we have it, I think it's going to be awesome.
100%. Fully agree. Well said.
All right, cool. Well, John, thank you again. You were a great guest, and I'll see you maybe another time in the future.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.